I will get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Best Practice Hour, a collaboration between the UIC Center for Clinical and Translational Science and the Cancer Center. Before we start, we've got a, um, a little announcement. The CCTS organizers of the Masterclass program is looking for your input on future topics to include. A link to the short survey will be posted in the chat. We really appreciate your input in making our educational offerings meet the needs of the research community on campus. Today's presentation is on IND regulations. Darlene Kitterman will be joining us today. She's been the administrative director of the University of Illinois Cancer Center Clinical Trials Office since 2017. Before coming to the University of Illinois Cancer Center, she was a program director at the OCTRI Investigator Support and Investigator Support Program at OHSU since 2002. Before that, she spent 4 years as Associate Director of the Clinical Research Program at UCSF in a similar role, as well as co-founding and coordinating the Clinical Research Management Master's Program at the UCSF School of Nursing. She began her career in basic research and spent 10 years in the pharmaceutical industry running clinical trials in a variety of capacities, including monitoring, project management, and regulatory management for both domestic and international clinical trials. As a reminder, we ask that you please keep yourself on mute during the presentation unless you're asking a question. Questions can also be submitted through Zoom's chat feature or anonymously posted through the Q&A feature. For those enrolled in the RC Plus certificate program, attendance is verified through the Best Practice Hours registration process. Please make sure your Zoom name matches your RC Plus program registration name. If you are in the RC Plus program but have not registered for this Best Practice Hour in the CCTS's Learning Management System, please be sure to do so. Those who have registered for this Best Practice Hour can access the presentation after today's seminar on the CCTS training website. Those who are attending today's seminar can also download a certificate of completion of this course from the training website. Today's presentation will cover core competency number 3, medicine development and regulation. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Darlene.
Thank you. While I'm presenting, I'm going to turn my video off and then share my screen. And I will turn it back on for the Q&A. There we go. So that's me. Just letting everybody know, I probably won't keep up with the chat while I'm speaking, so we'll take chat questions at the end, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask me a question as I'm speaking as well. I have no problem with that. We should have plenty of time. So I'm not concerned about going off topic a little bit. So I'm going to talk about IND regulations. And just to say, I'm going to talk about IND regulations. Most, if not all, of what I have to say also applies to IDEs, which we'll get into what those are in a second. But since it's too hard to say IND, IDE throughout the entire presentation, please know that a lot is interchangeable, not everything. And if someone has specific IDE questions, we can take that at the end. So regulatory definitions. So what is an IND? It stands for Investigational New Drug Application, and it is an authorization to administer an investigational drug to humans. So remember, well, we'll talk about the definition of what investigational means in a second, and when you need an IND. Just to skip quickly, so investigation, I just said investigational device exemption or IDE. So that's really the same thing, but for a device, and for a certain type of device. So FDA regulates many things as devices, including thermometers and blood pressure cuffs, along with things that are implantable in a person, like implantable heart devices and valves and things you implant in a person's brain. The things you need an IDE for are what's called a class 3 device, or something that is implantable, or is the results from that device are used, in a sort of life-saving situation. A molecular diagnostic where you're determining treatment. So those are the kinds of things that require an IDE. Those other types of devices, there are different other like 510(k) and other types of regulatory pathways for those devices, and I'm not covering those here. I could potentially do a whole thing on devices, though. That's not what this is. Back to the INDs and IDEs, there are also, investigational devices, investigational drugs need INDs and IDEs. And under a protocol, so you actually have a research protocol that you're looking at a whole bunch of patients. If there is something that's investigational that isn't going to be studied under a protocol, but is going to be used for a single patient because it would be beneficial to that patient, then investigators, physicians can get approval to use a device or a drug in that single patient. So it isn't really research. It does require the study to go through the FDA, the use to go through the FDA and the IRB, but it's called a single patient IND or emergency use IDE that allows the treatment of a single patient with a non-approved drug or device. So this is in the situation, there's no other therapy that is going to work in that person. And they have to have a serious or immediately life-threatening do these quite a bit in oncology. There's no other option. There's some investigational trial going on with, let's say, a drug, but it's not being, either that patient can't get into that trial or it's not being studied for that particular type of cancer. And so an investigator will apply to get access to that drug in that single patient. Then there is also another IND type of IND IDE to give patients access, but it's when there's more than one patient. And that's when, you have a drug, it's maybe used in a clinical trial, but we want to expand that use. Often companies will use the expanded access pathway when the trial's over. The drug looks very beneficial, but there's like a year and a half there when the study's being reviewed by the FDA, and they want to still allow people to have use to the drug. That's expanded access. People will call it a treatment IND or treatment IDE. But that's usually a similar situation to a single patient or emergency use IND, but to give a lot more people access. So I'm going to back up. I'm going to talk about first, the regular run-of-the-mill IND or IDE. So when do we need an IND or an IDE? So I talked about investigational. So that means something that has not been cleared for marketing by the FDA. So it could be something that's first in human. It's never been approved by the FDA or any regulatory agency. It could be approved in Europe or a different country, but it hasn't been approved in the US. That's still considered investigational in the US. And so if you want to study that product in a human being, then you need to pull an IND first. The other situation, you could actually have a drug that has been cleared for marketing by the FDA, but in the process of the research, that product is being studied in a different way. So there's something called labeling or package insert that describes the approved uses of a product. And the research may involve a different use. So it could be a different indication. So I see here, I say a different patient population, but so it could be like by population, it could be, let's say we're going to use it in a pediatric population, it's only approved in adults. It also could be a different disease, like we're going to study, it's approved in one kind of cancer, and we're going to study it in a different kind of cancer. Or we're using it in the labeled population, but we may be changing the dose or the schedule of the dose or how we're giving the drug or when we're giving the drug. And this change creates a significantly increased risk or acceptability of risk. So it's sometimes changes are allowed and you don't need to get an IND. So an example is we have a trial in the cancer center where we're giving it at the right dose, but we're doing a run-in to get it to that dose. So we're giving it a little differently than the package insert. And we actually didn't need to pull an IND for that because we asked the FDA, hey, do we need this? Does this meet the exemption criteria? Because that whole significantly increased risk is obviously a judgment call. It's not very specific. And they said, no, it's okay. Now, we actually ask if there's any question, if we're using it in any sort of difference, at least in the cancer center, we actually ask the FDA, is this okay? Because we don't want to be in a situation where we didn't pull an IND when we should have, and they will give you a letter. And so then you have that letter if anyone asks you later on. But anything that's obviously different, you're most likely going to need to pull an IND before you proceed with that research. So I mentioned exemptions. So it has to meet all of these exemption criteria. So the drug has to be lawfully marketed in the United States. The investigation is not intended to change the labeling. So if a company owns a product and they want to change anything in that label and make any claims that that drug is good for whatever you're studying it for, then that work has to be done under an IND. We're not changing the route of administration, dose, patient population, or other factor that significantly increases the risk that we talked about. And then it has IRB approval, and the investigation is not intended to promote or commercialize the product. So if it meets all of those criteria, it could be exempt. Though, like I said, if we're looking at any changes in the labeling of the drug, I always say that people should ask. And the way you ask, I have on the second bullet, they usually ask for a kind of mini IND to look at it. So the protocol, the ICF, the schema, the synopsis, and you submit it through the FDA portal and email the FDA review division that's responsible for that drug. And I have the link there, link to instructions there on how to ask for an exemption. So assuming you need to submit an IND, this is the pieces that are in the IND. So one of the important pieces, so usually, not always, when an investigator is running a study that needs an IND, they're not producing the drug. So because of that, you have to actually have a letter of authorization from the manufacturer. And you're gonna need to talk to the manufacturer anyway, because you may need, if it's truly an investigational drug, the only way to get access to that investigational drug would be for the manufacturer to provide it to the investigator. So there would need to be discussions well ahead of time between the investigator and the company. Investigators sometimes don't realize that. So there has to be active participation, both to get access to the drug to use in the research, and then to get the letter of authorization from the device and the drug provider. And this is to cross-reference their IND. So what does that mean? So they have an IND for the use of the investigational use of the drug. And instead of we'll get to the difference. There are some very complex sections in IND that describe the drug and how it's manufactured and what the chemical compound is and how stable it is, and toxicology testing, and reams and reams and reams of data and information that needs to go into the IND about the product itself. We, as a research institution, don't just have that information. And so the options for an investigator are either to get the manufacturer to give us all of that information to put into their IND, or to just cross-reference the number of the manufacturer's IND that has that information in it. And I'll go through what sections that those are in just a second. The thing is, you need permission, though, from the company to do that cross-reference, and that's what that letter of authorization is. Then there are a bunch of FDA forms that are available on their website. So there's a 3674, which has to do with, I'm not going to go into the requirements for clinicaltrials.gov. We have a whole separate talk on that, but any clinical trial needs to be registered on clinicaltrials.gov, and there's a form that needs to fill out about that goes in with the IND. Form 1571, which is the IND application cover, and that 1571 goes on the initial application as well as everything else that gets submitted to the FDA for that IND. So all subsequent IND submissions, materials, and I'll get into what you need to submit subsequently, need to have a 1571 cover on it. And then the 1572 for all of the investigators. So it might be a multi-center study that our PI is lead. You would need 1572s for each of the sites, the PIs at the different sites, and then the PI at UIC, who the IND is under, needs to fill out a 1572, and that needs to be included in the application. The IND application itself, the contents of which I will go over in a second. If there is an investigational brochure available, like the sponsor has one, that would be included. The protocol that's being proposed, the informed consent form that's being proposed, the CV of the principal investigator, and a cover letter. This submission, as well as all subsequent submissions, are done now through FDA's Electronic Submissions Gateway, or ESG. The link is on the resources section on the last page of this presentation. Just for a long time, this ESG has existed, and it was not mandatory for investigators to use it, and the regulations changed a little while back. And the FDA kept threatening that they would only accept submissions through the gateway. And then right when one of our investigators was submitting their IND in the Cancer Center, FDA started mandating that everything had to come through the gateway. However, UIC's security was not compliant with the gateway, and so we couldn't use it. So that's been fixed. So you can all use the gateway. And there shouldn't be any problem with that. It is compatible with UIC's systems. So you shouldn't have any problems. Okay, so the application itself, these are the required sections. So an introduction, a description of the investigational agent, like what is it? The dosage and exposure you're going to use it in the study. And then all of the highlighted and asterisked sections are things you would get from the manufacturer, or put in that section, please see IND number, with their IND number that has that information. So the overview of previous human experience, overview of all the preclinical data, the general investigational plan, research rationale and objectives, proposed clinical research. A lot of that can be taken from the protocol itself. But you have to copy and paste it into the IND itself, even though it is in the protocol. Anticipated risks from the study drug, obviously that would come from the previous experience of the sponsor, the investigator's brochure, then the protocol itself, a description of the investigator and the investigator's facilities, chemistry and manufacturing, pharmacology and toxicology. So this is all about the drug, and the previous experience with the investigational agent, that would all come from the manufacturer. If the investigator is actually producing the agent that's in the IND and have worked on those INDs before. So let's say the investigator has developed in their own lab a monoclonal antibody that's going to be used clinically. Then all of this information in great detail, down to lists of reagents of what goes into that and the sources for all of those reagents, all need to, where is the lab? Is it under GLP conditions? Like, all of that would need to actually be in the application, because the investigator, if they're doing all that and they're producing what's being put into a person, and they would have had to all of these like previous preclinical data, chemistry and manufacturing information, pharmacology and toxicology, the investigator would have had to run all of those tests, undo all of this that preclinical work, before submitting their IND. Okay, so you submit the IND and then it gets a little weird. So you submit it, and you get a letter from the FDA with the date they received the application, and that letter also has the new IND number in it. You keep that letter, because that letter will get into, helps you know when your annual report is due. It's that date in the letter that tells you when you can actually start your study after the IND. Now, holding off, you need IRB approval as well, but basically you get that first letter and then you wait 30 days, and the FDA doesn't send you a letter that says, okay, it's been 30 days, you can go now. You just wait. And then if it's past that 30 days and you haven't heard from the FDA about the fact that you can't do anything, then you can go, assuming you have all of your other startup things in place. If there's a problem, the FDA will reach out. You don't have to call and say, hey, is everything okay? They just let you know. The IRB will want to see that IND letter, that you have an IND as part of the submission. You can submit without it, and then the UIC IRB will hold approval until they get the IND letter. Or you could wait and then submit to the IND everything once you have the IND letter, either way. And then you also will have to submit your IRB approval to the FDA as part of a later update packet. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg. So as I said, you need to submit things to so you're going, your study's going, you've gone through all your startup activities, as well as the fact you have your effective IND, that you're not done with submitting things to the FDA, or the IRB. So you need to do all your IRB required submissions you do for anything other study, continuing reviews, AEs, and amendments. And then in addition, you need to submit to the FDA protocol, and IND amendment applications. So that's any amendment to the protocol and any change to the IND itself. So what do I need? So let's say there's a new risk, and then that would need to go to the FDA. Or let's say the manufacturing facility moved. So that's only in the IND, it's not in the protocol. It would still have to go to the FDA. So it's any change in anything that you submitted in that initial IND would need to go to the FDA first, and then if it's a protocol amendment, then it would go to the FDA and then it would go to the IRB. So I already talked about information amendments. Another thing that needs to go to the FDA in an information amendment would be if you add sites. And that could be, the study was multi-center at the beginning, we're just adding a new site. So you have to include the 1572 and CV of each new investigator. That needs to be submitted to the FDA. if your investigator's lead of a multi-center. We've actually, in the Cancer Center, had a bunch of studies that started off with one site, and then we decided that we needed it to be multi-center usually because we're not accruing the way we would like. So each time you add a site, you need to tell both the IRB as well as the FDA. Then, if something bad happens, so something that reaches the level of a serious adverse experience that is unexpected and associated with the drug, needs to be submitted to the FDA on a what we call a MedWatch report or an FDA Form 3500. As soon as known, but no later than 7 days for something that's fatal or life-threatening, and 15 days for all other events. And then you also submit AEs to the IRB, but you follow the IRB policy you always follow which is different than the FDA requirements. And then every year you need to submit an IND annual report. That report is due within 60 days of the anniversary date the application went into effect. So you look at that date, and then you need to count, and that's when your annual report is due. Please don't forget about your annual report. I've seen that happen. The FDA does get around to asking you for it later, and so that's not a good thing. The contents of the annual report are here. It is not something that can be done without the investigator's assistance and help. I know sometimes our investigators like us to do, same with the IND itself, like us to just go off and do our things. It's not like an IRB continuing review where often regulatory staff or coordinators can submit that all on their own. An IND annual report requires a bunch of data. And so whoever's doing the submission is going to need the help of their investigator. They're not going to be able to do it on their own. So what is in it? A brief summary of the status of each study in progress and what was completed during the year. For if it's investigator IND, it's probably just that one study. But you do need to include the total number of subject initially planned for inclusion, the numbers entered into the study, tabulated by age group, gender, and race, the number of participants who completed, and the number of who dropped out with the reason for dropout, and then a brief description of any available study results. So that definitely needs to come from the investigator. And then everything that's happened in the past year. So a whole narrative or tabular summary of the most frequent and most serious adverse events by body system, a summary of all the IND safety reports, a list of subjects who died with the cause of death, a list of subjects who dropped out of the course in association with any adverse experience, whether it was related or not, a description of what the sort of a description of the information obtained that's pertinent to the understanding of the drug's action, including, for example, information about dose, bioavailability, relevant information from controlled trials. That will most likely come from the manufacturer, and we just cross-reference their IND. Same with the list of preclinical studies that are going on, we would cross-reference. And then finally, any significant manufacturing changes, that would also usually be a cross-reference to the manufacturer's IND. Then a description of the investigational plan for the coming year. If there's a revised investigational brochure, you get that from the sponsor, and you can cross-reference that if they haven't. Either you can attach it if the sponsor gives it to you, or you can cross-reference it in their IND. And then a description of all the protocol modifications made during the previous year and not previously reported the IND in a protocol amendment. So let's say you did an information amendment and you had a protocol amendment, but your annual report is also due, you can combine them into your annual report. And that's what most people do. Okay. So that's the regular IND. Now I'm just going to sort of go through like how to submit the other types of INDs that we talked about. So first, the single patient emergency IND, where, we got a patient who presents and they want access to an investigational drug outside of a clinical trial. So if it's an emergency, so I'm going through so there's emergent single patient INDs and non-emergent single patient INDs. So the emergent, there is a life-threatening situation. So there is no sufficient time to obtain normal IRB approval. So the request can be made via telephone, and the authorization for the use of the drug may be given by the FDA official over the telephone to you. And then the shipment and treatment with the drug may begin prior to FDA's receipt of the written IND submission that is to follow the initial request. So the regular single patient IND has a form. It's different than the IND that I just talked about. It has its own separate form now. It used to be the same. It's not anymore. So for an emergency, you can do all this over the phone. You still have to do all the paperwork, but you would follow up with it. And you still need to go to the IRB though for an emergency IND, single patient IND. I would call the IRB or email and call and let them know, because they will get everything. I've seen it happen through extraordinarily quickly in this situation, but does still need to go through the IRB. So as I just sort of the details here, you still need the LOA from the sponsor. You can get the authorization and the issuance of the IND number over the phone for the emergency IND. Notify the IRB and receive acknowledgement of the emergency use from the IRB chair before administering the test article. So it still goes to the IRB, but they'll take it directly to a chair. You complete all of the same applications, both the FDA forms, the form 3926, which is the special form, the CV of the physician, the LOA, and some information about the use of the drug, but you can send it in after you get authorization, but it has to be by day 15. Then the patient gets treated. And so within 5 days of treatment, you need to tell the IRB that the drug has been used. And then you have to also tell the FDA after the investigational treatment has been completed and close the IND. So down there's the link to all the instructions from the FDA. But the big thing with the emergency use is you can get all this information prior to submitting the forms and use it prior to submitting the forms to the FDA. So the non-emergent use is it's the same forms, but you need to do it all in writing ahead of time. So the investigational drug may be shipped and treatment of the patient may begin 30 days after the single-use application received by the FDA or earlier. But it's the same forms. But you have to submit everything and wait, and it's not done in this sort of emergency fashion. And the IRBs, the same IRB requirements hold, but you don't have to like call and panic and get on the phone with the IRB. You just submit your IRB submission. And when you have your IND and your IRB application, then you treat the patient. You still have to tell the IRB and the FDA when treatment is done. So here's a bunch of resources. There's a great resource on the FDA website about investigator-initiated INDs, as well as the IDE approval process. There is also a whole separate site just for emergency INDs and expanded access information. And then Rachel provided me a good regulatory guidance for regular INDs, the Regard IND guidance, and the link is here. You're all going to have access to these slides, so don't worry about writing this down. The FDA submission portal is there. And then just as far as IND, IDE assistance at the university, so all oncology related INDs and IDEs are done by the Cancer Center Clinical Trials Office, so my staff. So we do all of them. I kind of, I hate to use the word require, but this one would be a require. And then for everything outside of oncology, CCTS has help. Rachel helps people all the time. I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. For the clinical trials office, we actually do the IND for the investigator. Rachel, I don't know if you can sort of chime in here. I don't know if you actually do the INDs, but you give a lot of amazing help. So that said, I'm going to stop sharing and turn on my video. And I see two chats. Oh, that's upcoming events. And I open it up for questions.
I'm going to start because I definitely have a question. This is Rachel. You did mention, and thank you for the CCTS regulatory support. I do get this question periodically. I've gotten it more frequently recently, so I don't know what's going on, but it looks like a lot of work in the IND and IDE space. Yeah, I don't fill out applications for people, but yes, I do provide guidance on the process. I refer a lot of people to that Regard website just because it's built for and geared towards investigator-initiated projects, and they have a lot of kind of step-by-step instructions, so it's very helpful. But my question, or maybe you can elaborate on the process of contacting the FDA when you're not sure if an IND is required. Sometimes the IRB, like an IRB application will come in and the IRB will come back and say you need to consult with the FDA about whether you need an IND. So I know you mentioned it, but can you talk about kind of what that process looks like and how long it takes?
Um, it so it's sort of like you basically need to submit an IND. It's like an abbreviated form of the IND. It wouldn't have an LOA, but they're gonna need the protocol, the ICF, all the information about what you're doing, and then you submit it. We usually call them as well and speak with them. The rigor of what to send sometimes depends on the division that's reviewing, also how much wiggle room you have. Like, so for instance, I think in oncology, we often will do studies where it's in a slightly different, it's in metastatic instead of frontline, or, there's a lot of gray. And I think the division that approves cancer related drugs is their definition of sort of significantly more unsafe is a little bit high. You have a much higher bar. These patients are getting chemotherapy all the time, so how much more dangerous really is it? And so they have a tendency of giving us more leadway and not making us do an IND than, let's say, we had something that was used in mental health that we were then using in a cancer patients in a slightly different way. And the mental health division is like, oh no, you need an IND. Absolutely. I mean, even though they're taking chemotherapy, like, is this really like that much more dangerous than the rest of their treatment? Like, really? But their threshold was like way different than the cancer division. So that said, you submit through the portal and then you like email them or talk to them about your study, and then they will give you a letter if they think you don't need an IND. And that's the letter you can give to the IRB if they're questioning, does this require one?
Okay.
And it doesn't take long. They don't take long.
Sorry, I don't, oh, we do have a question in the chat. We'll start with that one first. Since the FDA is laying off, do you think the feedback from the FDA will be slower than before?
We're in new territory. I
Yeah.
have no idea. I, I
Yeah,
don't
that's something we'll
wait
have to
to
keep an
happen.
eye on.
Yeah, but definitely it could. I know the FDA I went to the FDA website to look something up and it was down back when everything was like getting frozen. So, if the website's down, the gateway's down, we can't even submit it, let alone them taking a while getting back to us. So I don't know what to say. Good luck to us all.
Do you have any experience with working with dietary supplements that are being
Yes,
tested as
yes,
well?
yes.
Okay.
Lots. They need
And
they need INDs too. In particular, any supplements, remember supplements aren't usually not approved, they're not labeled to be used for a medical condition. So if you're using it for a medical condition, it's not labeled for that, it needs an IND. Because prior to you doing that study, it wasn't used as a drug. And now by using it to treat, mitigate, or diagnose something, then it is now considered a drug, and an unapproved drug. So it may be approved to be marketed as a supplement, but it's not approved to be used as a drug. And so then you need to, if you're going to use it as a drug, you need to treat it like any other drug from an IND perspective.
and where do you get the information then for all of those different sections of the IND application?
So they don't have an IND already. So remember I said you can either have the manufacturer provide it or
Mhm.
cross-reference. So in that case, you would have to provide it because they don't have a pre-existing IND.
Okay.
And they're, well, this is again, just saying that there has to be a relationship often with the manufacturer, and it can be difficult if the investigator's like, I'm just gonna do with something with this new nutraceutical, and I'm gonna buy it from Amazon, but then you need all this chemical, like CMC information, everything else, and they haven't talked to any manufacturer. You can't do that. Like they actually have to reach out and get this information. Otherwise, they will not be able to submit an IND. And investigators don't really realize that.
Mhm.
And if they can't get it, it is in effect, I've seen it stop research. Like you can't do the study because the manufacturer doesn't want to provide any information.
We have another comment or question in the chat. Could you please introduce some conditional permission like the COVID vaccine?
I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, not sure either. Yeah, Chang Su, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, on your question.
Okay, does anybody else? Okay. Anyone else have anything they would like to ask?
Yes, I have a question.
Hi,
When
Latifa.
hello, when they suspend the study, what's the timeline to inform the FDA?
There isn't really a timeline. You have to do you have to do an informational amendment saying you've suspended the study. and tell them why. And if it's for a safety reason, you have to submit all those safety reports. But there isn't, and there's timelines for those safety reports going in, but there isn't a specific timeline. Now, you technically are not allowed to amend the study without hearing from the FDA. There are exceptions for emergencies. So, you know, if you have something that you need to do to a patient and it's an emergent situation, you implement it and then tell both the IRB and the FDA later. So you can't really, you need to submit it to the, if you're going to actually change something that then results in the protocol that results in the suspension, like I'm going to change my statistical plan that now I'm going to suspend the study for data analysis, you would need to get that protocol amendment approved and that analysis amendment approved before you moved forward with it.
Okay. And then for the studies that's been suspended for 2 years, 3 years, the FDA is okay, like there's no problem with that, right?
No, they would know about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Guess that's it. Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, thank you all for participating. And I will see you later.
Thanks, Darlene. Just also to comment that if you do have questions about this process, the CCTS does have a regulatory team. I usually handle the FDA stuff. So if you have some questions later, you can send them our way. So I just want to say thank you, Darlene, for your presentation, and thank you to everybody who attended today. As a reminder, the Masterclass program is looking for your input on future topics to include. A link to the short survey is posted in the chat, and we appreciate your ideas on topics for future Masterclass seminars. Our next best practice hour will be on Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, from noon to 1 on the best practices of recruitment and retention. Keep an eye out for details in emails regarding these future sessions. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.